So while I have everybody on the screen, about what age did you guys, and you can either type this in chat or you can raise your hand. What age did you start watching or reading or listening to the news? About what age were you guys at when you started doing that? What year, what age? 6 or 7? Okay.
8.
8. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, that's probably true. It would have been about 1960. So I would have been that I remember my parents watching the nightly news.
Okay.
So I would have been about 8 or 9.
Okay. So, so can I kind of say that we're like TV, radio is how people were getting their news? What about newspapers? When did people start reading newspapers if they read them? What about what age?
Well, I was just going to say I was about 5 when I started reading the newspaper. I didn't even have a television until I was in my early 20s.
Okay.
So I don't know when I started watching the news, but it would have been 20s.
20s. Okay. Okay, good. The reason I'm asking that question is a lot of times when we start with one technology and we move to other technologies, we don't always transfer all of our habits over. So by today, how many people are still reading paper newspapers? Is anybody still reading paper newspapers? I am, but okay.
I am.
Okay.
I
Okay,
am.
good. All right. So people are still reading paper newspapers. What about, where would you say you spend the most time per day getting your news?
Newspapers for me.
Newspapers, online or paper?
Both.
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 Okay.
Yeah. I've got like
Okay.
5 subscriptions. So
Yeah, I have about that many too. What about, are you getting news over Twitter, Facebook, Instagram?
no.
No.
I don't consider that news. It's sort of
Okay,
commentary.
That's interesting. Okay, that's interesting. Okay. TV, newspaper, online. Okay. What about so if the media, first of all, there isn't a media. When we say the media is this or the media is that, the media is us as well as a whole bunch of other people. So if we think about traditional print journalism, which would be local newspapers, national newspapers, and national broadcasters, now they've been joined by a lot of people who are freelancing. So for example, I have subscriptions on Substack. I have Patreon accounts for YouTube people. I have other people. So I'm getting news from a lot of different producers. And the reason I'm doing this is that every time we have access to news, and we're doing this before we talk about mind science so we can kind of set the scene. So when the ability to print books happened, way in the back, Gutenberg Bible, okay, right? We went from basically monks writing on paper so that access to information was very tightly controlled by a very small number of people. When we moved to books, more people had access to that. When we moved to newspapers, we had more people have access to that information and free libraries. When we moved to radio, the barrier to entry was just having a radio set. When we moved to television, we added visuals. When we added the internet and we added access to information that where we didn't have to go to books, then we expanded that. And every time we did that, people's access to information got bigger and bigger.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. And information can be factual, or there can be misinformation and disinformation. When it was tightly controlled, it was controlled by those people for a number of reasons. Now it's less controlled, but everybody has access to it. And we don't have the analytical skills that people use to curate the news. And that's what we are now having to do. And so since we're human beings, we're going to go back and share my screen again. Since we're human beings, we are also fallible. So how does our biology influence our belief? The brain, we have a brain that needs to make categories to make sense. We get so much data through all of our senses. We could not make sense of the world if we did not make categories. And our brain is set up to try to see if something is a threat. Something that is not familiar to us can be a threat. And we need to understand that about ourselves. Once we understand that, then we can learn to take a breath and see whether that's important or not. And that comes up with what we also have a culture that says, okay, this is how things work. This is a fact, this is an opinion, this is belief. And that can vary across culture. Now, in our culture, we have a specific, and we're going to talk a minute about what journalistic facts are. But we also have biases that we just absorbed by being in that culture. And we don't always understand those biases. And so sometimes it's easy to see how in the Pew quiz, people could see that something was a fact or an opinion, and it was influenced by how their political beliefs made them see the world. Our biology also influences another stuff, which is that we need to be connected. And so the idea that we identify politically as Democrats, Republicans, or independents, which is an artificial construct. But if we feel connected to those people, then we're going to be more likely to believe what somebody in that connection says. If we want to see the world as it is, as factually it is, so that we can make decisions about it, then we need to be aware of our own biases, and we need to be able to have what I call a beginner's mind when looking at information. Because what feels safer and more comfortable becomes desirable. And I think one of the things that's helpful to understand is there's a website that I talk about here called Outsmarting Human Minds. Outsmarting Human Minds is a project by Harvard University. And it uses a wonderful tool, a wonderful sets of tools to demonstrate the kind of implicit bias that we hold. And I'm going to describe that, but I encourage you to go to the website because they have some really nice videos that talk about different ways of understanding how our human minds work so that we can operate from our values rather than just from our automatic responses. One of the tools they have is they have you you choose which test you want. So they have several tests. So an implicit bias about Black versus white, whether men or women are better leaders, whether fat or thin people are better. And what you do is you get two pictures and you're asked some questions and you have to push the buttons on your computer. And they can measure how fast you push the buttons. And that measurement, if it takes you more time to push the button in something you're not comfortable with, and they've done this millions and millions of times, what it demonstrates is that you have an implicit bias. So when I took the test, so in my opinion, I think human beings are equally valuable. Race is not, doesn't mean I don't see race, but I think equally valuable. And I think women, I actually think women are better leaders than men. That's my personal opinion. And as a fat person living in a world where thin people are more valued, I actually think you can be fit and healthy and be fat. And so those are my personal values. But when I took those tests, I had a fairly high bias for white people over Black people. I had a very slim bias for men rather than women as leaders. And it showed that I had a very significant bias for thin over fat. So those are things I didn't know about myself. If you know these things, then you know, oh, my immediate reaction to this information may not be a reaction based on my values. And so that's where I can go check myself. And so that's why it's important to understand yourself and how you react so that you can make those decisions.